Look, Simba, everything the light touches is our kingdom. A king's time as ruler rises and falls like the sun. One day, Simba, the sun will set on my time here and will rise with you as the new king.
And this'll all be mine?
Everything.
Everything the light touches.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk Stories. This week's episode, we are taking a journey to the 90s, and we are visiting a world where stoicism meets deontology, and we are talking about duty and responsibility versus carefree living. We are talking about the only movie that this could possibly be about, and that is The Lion King. So that's what we're talking about today. I am your host, one of your hosts, Jared. I am here with Jaylon and Charles.
Hello.
They're here this week it is just the three of us.
But we have
But,
blanket burritos.
We are blanket burritos. Everybody but Charles. Charles was not a blanket burrito today. That's okay though. We are blanket burritos, embracing the preteen joy that is The Lion King. Yes. So, before we jump into our conversation about the film, we are going to do our usuals. What did everybody get into this past week? What did you guys watch, read, listen to? What'd you love?
I can tell you what I would have been obsessed with this week if I was brave enough to open the book, and that is Onyx Storm, because that book just came out, and I was stuck at the end of Iron Flame and screamed at 2 a.m. when I finished it because the cliffhanger was so terrible, and now I'm scared to crack open the next book because, yeah, I'm scared. Once I do crack it open, I'm sure that I will be obsessed with it, whether it's good or bad.
Fair enough.
Well, I have had an incredibly shitty week, and I will say that there, and I'm recovering from, still very ill right now, and I'm recovering from that. So sorry, I mean, I'm recording from my phone here, people. Like, nothing is going my way. So I didn't really read or watch anything particularly new, which is a bit of a shame. But a fair warning here for everyone, and I will try to be as abridged as possible. The one thing I did do this week in preparation for this was go down the Walt Disney Animation Studios production history rabbit hole, which is a rabbit hole I live in a lot. So that was my forte there in developing all these weird ass theories about like this wonderfully evil corporation of evil that somehow can still bring good to the world, and it's a rabbit hole that I've always been down, but I did that this week. So that is my forte. I apologize.
That is a very interesting rabbit hole.
It's funny to talk about the corporate evil thing that is Disney, though. I just spoke to someone today who worked for 20th Century Fox right before Disney came in and chopped it all up the way that they did, and he was talking about how he had suffered the layoffs because of Disney's involvement. So it's just interesting that you talk about the corporate giant that is Disney. I mean, as well as us talking about Disney today, but yeah, that's my thought on that. I watched House of the Dragon this week. I had seen the first season before, but I had forgotten everything that had happened. So I rewatched it all and then watched the newest season. Now I have to wait until I don't know when for season 3 to come out, and I'm really upset about it because it had 8 episodes, and the first season had 10. And so I was like watching the 8th episode, and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be good." There's 2 more episodes, and I'm excited. And then it was just like over, and I was just like, "No!" And I was so upset. I was like, "Why? Why is it so short?" That, as well as getting to see Millie Alcock play Renea, I think her name is, or Renaria, whatever her name is. I'm terrible with names, so forgive me, Game of Thrones fans. Seeing her do that, and my hype for her to play Supergirl in the James Gunn Superman movie, as well as the Supergirl movie, which also I'm hyped about. Jason Momoa playing Lobos. So I'm just so excited. And so her as an actress, though, her presence is so damn good. I'm just like so excited to see how she plays Supergirl. And I was trying to get that image in my mind of like what that might look like. So watching her again in this show was really, really, hopefully she's nothing like she is in the show, because she's not bad, but she's not Supergirl, to say the least. But
Ding.
yes, exactly. So I haven't seen her in anything else besides this, so I don't know what her range is like, but we will see. And I trust James Gunn to cast well, so we shall see. All that being said, though, let us jump in to The Lion King. And so, for those of you who have lived under a rock and who have never seen The Lion King, I say to you, turn this podcast off and never listen to it again, because you're not allowed.
I thought you were going to say go watch it first and then come back.
No. There's no forgiveness for you.
Immediately
banned forever. Permabanned from the podcast. But no, Lion King, which is a fantastic film. I love that movie, and I forgot how much I loved that movie. I know I said it to you guys that I liked the movie, that I really liked the movie, but like I forgot how much I loved the movie until I watched it the other day. And I was like, oh man, this movie is actually really, really great. It's a great coming of age story. And it was beautifully animated, great music, solid music. And, I watched that one, and I watched Simba's Pride afterwards. Simba's Pride is basically the Lion King 1 with less quality music and less quality animation and a female protagonist. That's pretty much it. It's pretty much the same, almost not beat for beat, but almost beat for beat. It's some variation of its predecessor in some way, shape, or form. But it's not the worst film I've ever seen.
Sequels, man. They are. There's a particular flavor to them that is not unlike bread. I don't know what bread. And before anyone's like, he's being pseudo intellectual, shut the frack up. I had all those VHS tapes and I watched it. I know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I would say that Lion King it's fantastic. When was the first time you guys saw The Lion King?
That was actually fun story. As I was very sheltered and it wasn't that I was sheltered. It was that I couldn't deal with scary villains, even animated ones in Disney films. And so my mom was like, I'm not staying awake with you while you have nightmares because I let you watch a Disney movie. So I waited until I was 15. And then, that was one of the first Disney movies that my mom showed me and my sister. We had a movie night together and sitting in our little bunk bed. And so that was one of my first introductions to classic Disney films ever. And needless to say, I was hooked. I actually did not know, going back to like all the spin-offs that were made off of Lion King, I didn't know until just this past week that Lion King 1.5 was an actual movie and not just a joke. Because I always heard it said in the context of a joke.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it was actually a movie.
You're not gonna have me kiss this film's arse today, folks. But that doesn't mean I'm a hater. That's not true. That's not true. A very specific thing. I'm just not gonna kiss this movie's arse or the franchise or anything, even though I care about it. So this is this weird, mostly light but somewhat dark gray shtick. No, I just knew the movie from like a very, very little age. Thing is, and the I have a whole history of this movie, which I'm not going to tell any of you because you're not my significant other, so I don't have to. My significant other she can know, but we're not there yet. But otherwise, my mom, I'm really connected to this film with my mom because she loved this movie because she's really into cats, and so big cats, and she loves. So every time if I ever go to a zoo with her, she's got to see the lions. She's got to see the tigers. She's got to be, all that stuff. So she was just always really in love with this movie, and that's my connection there. But I just always knew it because I was one of those. It's funny too because you could almost say I was one of like those Disney kids who knew all like the Disney stuff and yada yada yada, which is true. At the same time, I was also one of those people who like knew some of the earlier Studio Ghibli releases at the time, like Kiki and Princess Mononoke and stuff like that. So I guess it was just really, and I knew like Anastasia and Don Bluth and Gary Goldman's movies, Land Before Time. So I was just really an animation kid through and through. But I knew this movie since I was a kid. And it still to this day just looks so unreal. Like I just kind of look at it and I have to squint. I'm like, that can't possibly be real. That can't possibly have be something that people made because it's so different from anything that Disney had made up to that point since then. Anyone really. So that's something I've always been really attached to. But I will say, in an interesting way, again, I have a very, very specific interpretation of this movie. It's not bad; it's an interesting one, but it is definitely one of those things where people kind of go like, "You're such a hater." I'm like, I don't hate this movie. I actually care about it. I actually really like this movie, and I have a very specific connection to it that no one else does. It's like they've bought into the whole Disney machine and stuff like that. If we get there, we get there. But that's it. But I do care about this movie. Fun fact, actually, something I used to do. The last stage play I did Mousetrap, and I was the weird guy that comes in last before the end of the first scene. And what I would do, I had to burst in on an argument from stage right. I think it's stage right or stage. I can't remember. And what I used to do to get myself pumped up because I had to come to the room kind of villainously. So the audience is watching the the two actors argue, right? And I'm behind a door, and you can't see me. But every night, I would basically mime the last bits of Scar's song, like really outrageously to get myself pumped up to come in and break up this argument, really villainously. So that's just kind of a fun. I don't know why that popped in my head, but yeah, I do care about this movie. I'm not going. I'm not. I am not a hater. You are not going to get, anything out of me. But I do have a very specific thing with this movie. But I've always known this movie. I've always known these Disney movies. So there you go. Sorry, that was a weird sentence. Like I said, I'm not feeling well.
I love that anecdote about the stage play.
My connection to The Lion King started when I was a kid, obviously like most people's. When I was a kid, it was one of the few movies I was allowed to watch at home. My exposure to most films and stuff like that was on weekends with my dad, who didn't really care what I watched. So I was able to watch all the rated R, horrible, violent movies. But when I was at home, I had to watch, Disney and things like that. And Lion King was like the first VHS that my mom ever bought me. And I got it like when they came out with like the promotional get a toy with the VHS type thing. And so I had like a Simba and a Mufasa toy that came with my VHS. And lions have always been my favorite animal. So I was just always like really, really into it. I got really, really into Lion King though later when I found out about like in recent years, when I found out about like the Lion's Guard and the whole like family tree that is the Lion King family tree, and like how, Kiara has, kids with Kovu and all of that, and how, so yeah, it was mostly when I was a kid, but I got really into like the lore, I guess, of Lion King later on in life. But
That's what so annoys me. And you know what? But you know what's funny? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm like, that's why I was getting another. There's Lord of the Lake. I'm like, it's not. And yet, I'm one of the few motherfrackers who's like, yeah, have you ever did you ever have that Disney read-along book about like Mufasa's grandpa during like Christmas? I always like that. So I hate myself because I'm like, there's no lore. It's fine. But at the same time, I'm like, but I know this because I'm myself. Sorry.
I say lore in the sense of the canon that is Lion King. That it is a whole thing. It's less. I think it's less known compared to other things that have much bigger audiences, and most people think of, like, Lion King. You think Lion King 1, maybe Lion King 2 if you're feeling, in the know, if you want to be in the know, about Lion King 2. But and then of course the other, Lion King 1.5 and the Lion King remake, which was terrible.
I don't want
And
to talk
Mufasa,
about it.
which I haven't. Don't worry, we will
Don't
not.
make me talk about it, please.
And then Mufasa, which I haven't seen yet, but I heard mixed things about it. I haven't seen it yet myself, so
I don't want to talk about it. Please don't make me talk about it.
We're not gonna
Okay.
we're
Cool.
not gonna make Charles's week any worse by reminding him of the
Again,
existence of
that's what's really interesting about this movie is that everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, it's so much to me," and I'm like, I never. Again, I have a weird history of this movie that I don't want to get into, and I can't, whatever. But like, I just never really connected with that movie. But you know what's funny? When that remake stuff came out, I got so mad. I got so mad, and it was weird because I'm like, I thought you didn't really care about it like that high, but I'm like, something about the movie just kind of clicks in my head of like being real defensive about it, which is an interesting thing with this movie. I find that very fascinating.
And then, of course, you have those that argue about Kimba, the white lion, and all that goes into that, which is supposedly what Lion King is a ripoff of. I don't
It's
know,
not.
and I don't care.
Humans in the modern real
Fair.
world.
Makes sense.
It's a long story. I know these things. Don't get me.
But yeah, so that's all of our connection to the Lion King itself. So let's talk. We're going to talk a little bit about, before we jump into like defining what a coming of age story is. I want to ask you, why do you think that the Lion King resonates so strongly as a coming of age story, even now, decades after it's come out into the world? Why do you feel like, or do you feel like it resonates as a coming of age story after all these years?
I will say yes, and that is because I think all of us can relate to this world feeling so much bigger and more terrible than we could have ever imagined, and wanting to run away from it because we're scared to face what we don't know will happen, the fear of the unknown. I mean, I know I've felt very much the scene where Simba listens to Scar and runs away, and he's under his father's paw and he's trying to revive what once was so real and such a picture of his innocence and his joy in life. We've all experienced our joy and our innocence dying as we have grown from childhood into adulthood. So, no matter what event caused it, we've all experienced an event like that, where we had to face a world that was a lot more dark and terrifying than we wanted to believe. And I think that it's a struggle we all have to still be willing to face the past and face the future bravely.
Yeah, I agree with that because again, I'm trying to say this structurally right so I don't go on a tangent or anything. But what's interesting is I, in a sense, and stick with me here, in a sense, I actually don't really view the story necessarily as a coming of age story. In that sense, an interesting way, if we wanted to not nitpick, this is not about nitpicking, but being jerking comparisons, but structurally speaking, I think in that sense, The Land Before Time, I think, is a stronger coming of age story because I think the responsibility element is a little bit more explicit and a little bit more tangible, at least for me. But, and again, I have a very interesting, meaningful thing to say about with the story, and maybe it is a coming of age, and that's why a good point about waiting on the definition of it. But I will say, I think to tie into there is that what's interesting is if you look at these, what is called the Disney Renaissance, right? Ariel wants to be human, and there's a lot of personal, very teenage stuff with there. Fantastic. Beauty and the Beast, very adult romance. Fantastic. Aladdin, a lot of self confidence, self identity issues. Also fantastic. And then The Lion King is a boy losing his dad, which is incredibly hard. And again, And I think that's something that works with the movie of why it's resonating is that it doesn't, relatively speaking, I think it doesn't pull punches, which I think is pretty fitting because you need that bite. Because me and my siblings talk about that with Disney movies. They're like, we need bite to those stories, but not because, one of those like, back in my day, they used to kill cat. No. It's not about that. It's that sense of you need the bite and the harshness so you can teach kids a little bit better stories. And I think that's why Lion King has lasted, is that there's no BS. There's no resurrection. There's no turning back the clock. Death is death. And some of the harshness works like that. Like, honestly, it's kind of interesting and I'm kind of getting a little bit into why this movie actually personally affects me, is, as a kid, Simba having that moment of, you're not there for me. Where are you? As a kid, I was like, but the lesson, right? But as an adult, it's like, crap, I understand that. I understand that kind of feeling, that kind of pain. And I think that's what's brilliant about, if you want to do writing lessons, I've always been a proponent that I think Disney movies, Disney animated films, have great lessons in writing, both to-dos and not to-dos, because there's some really brilliant stuff there. And I think that's one of the things that's so fascinating to me about them ever since I was in college, was that sense of you can follow things as a young person and get it, but then when you get older, it means something different. And I think that's what has made the story last, is it doesn't pull punches and grows with the audience.
Yes.
And you accept it better because you're able to have that, So it's kind of funny, like, put it this way. Here's another great example. As a kid, Mufasa getting mad at Simba, oh man, that scared the crap out of me, because I could feel that. But now as an adult, I see that and I'm like, oh, I get why Mufasa's so freaking mad. I get why he's so upset and frightened and of losing his son. I think that's brilliant. I think a lot of the Disney movies do that really bloody well, and I think this one has a very specific style that has really lasted. Again, if I'm talking too much about Disney animation history and stuff, you have to buzz me out. I'll go on.
No, more. I will say, just a funny side note before I let Jared say his piece. Do parents still use the phrase, like, every 5 seconds before they're about to spank their kid with the wooden spoon? Like, you deliberately disobeyed me.
No.
I feel like such a, these parent thing, and maybe it's just because I've grown up, and so I'm not around parents anymore, but that was a thing. So when Mufasa said that,
anyway.
I just laughed. I was transported immediately back to my childhood.
Some variation of that, for sure.
I just got beat the crap out of, so I don't know what. Okay, that's weird. Moving on.
Not everybody was raised in homes where that kind of thing was done.
Okay, fair.
I was definitely raised in a home where spankings were a thing. And that kind of variation of you deliberately disobeyed me was something I heard quite frequently growing up. So which is weird because it makes me think, oh, that's probably why I laugh at that every time I hear it now. But now that you said that, I never really thought about it.
Like I said before, it's so weird. It's like, for me, this is not the highest Disney movie or animated movie there. It's like, what's funny though? I can quote this movie like that. It's so flipping weird. Like, I've shown you, Jared. I've shown you. This movie is great for memes.
Yeah, that's true.
He's seen some of my very naughty memes using this movie. It's so weird.
I think, for me, that the whole coming of age thing this to me is very much a coming of age film. I think, along with what Charles was saying too about the whole you kind of grow with it type of thing. I think as an adult, there's a lot of moments in this movie for me too that I saw that as a kid I saw it very differently than I do as an adult. Very specifically, some great visual storytelling that I misinterpreted as a child, but as an adult now understood, was the scene where Simba is walking after his dad and he steps in his footprint. And when I was a kid, I used to always think, oh, well, Mufasa's just really mad. And so he stomped really, he pressed really hard and Simba was able to see it as kind of like, Dad's really mad, and this is a sign of that. As an adult, I've come to the realization that what it was the realization that you aren't quite ready to fill your father's footsteps yet. And as an adult now, I realize that was something that as a kid I never really got, but I didn't get it for that exact reason. I didn't get it because in my mind, I was brave and I could do all the things that my mom or my dad could do or my brother could do until I realized I couldn't do those things. And now as an adult, I realized, oh, there's so many things that I didn't understand when I was a kid, about how the world works, about the shoes that I would need to step into to ultimately adult in this world. And that brief snapshot of Simba stepping into his father's footprint is a perfect reminder of how when you're young you're not able to do that. And that entire movie is pretty much about that entire movie is pretty much about Simba trying to figure out how to fill his father's footprint in his own way. And it's interesting, all the characters that are in it, they all represent these different philosophical standpoints. It's really just about responsibility versus carefree and carefree living, or learning to find the balance in such, and that you can be both. It doesn't have to be, Simba from the beginning, from his first major song of Can't Wait to Be King, his entire ideology is, I can't wait to be able to tell everybody what to do and do whatever I want and not have to, do that. And I mean, even Scar had the same ideology as Simba did as a child. And you learn that in the part where Sarabi is telling him about how he needs to be responsible and get them food and do that. And he's like, I'm the king, I can do whatever I want. And it's the same exact thing that Simba thought growing up. And it's that level of responsibility that is forced to learn. And that's why I would say it's arguably one of the greatest Disney coming of age stories there is, purely because in the world that we live in today, all of us grew up, each and every one of us grew up thinking that the world was, I don't think we all thought that the world was going to be cotton candies and rainbows when we grew up, but none of us fully grasped what it meant to be responsible and have to pay your bills and have to go to work and have to take care of your family or your friends or the things that needed to be. Those were things that we didn't think about as kids because we didn't have to. That's the whole point of being a kid. You don't have to think about those things. But we grow up and we realize, oh, there's responsibility that comes with being an adult. But then I think the other lesson that you have to learn, and this is the lesson that Simba learns, is the lesson I think many of us need to adapt, is that you can be responsible. You can do your duty and still find inner peace and find a peace that allows you to kind of control with what you can control and learn from what you can't and move on. And that's the ultimate lesson of growing up, I think, or one of the ultimate lessons of growing up. And I think that that's why this movie is such a great coming of age story, because it's just a story of a young boy learning the value of responsibility and how to cope with grief. Those two things are ultimately his, at least in my opinion, those are the two journeys that Simba's on. And I think that brings me to the question of what exactly a coming of age story is, because there are many different people have different perspectives of what a coming of age story is. And so I'm curious as to what you guys think what are the key, first of all, what do you think the key elements for a coming of age story are? We'll start there. And so for anybody who's listening, who's writing a coming of age story or considering writing a coming of age story, I think this might be a good episode for you to listen to, but also this part of the story is important, or part of the podcast is important for you to pay attention to. See, English doesn't work for me. But yeah, so what do you guys consider the most important elements of a coming of age story?
For me personally, and I think this is true for everyone whether they realize it or not, the coming of age stories that first showcase some kind of death of innocence, you need to let us grieve with the character. Because everyone can relate to that moment of realization when you're dealing with something sad and you suddenly have that light bulb moment of the world isn't what I thought it was. And there's tragedy that I have to figure out how to reconcile. And I think that anytime I see a story use a tragedy like that or use a moment like that as either the point of no return where the protagonist is set on this journey that he can't turn away from, or as a key plot point that makes them move towards the growth, the lesson that they need to learn. I relate to very much because I can see myself in that. I can immediately go back to the grief that I had to reconcile when I was moving from childhood into adulthood. And another thing that I'll say a good coming of age story has to have is an honest lesson. Like Charles was saying, we can't pull punches when we're talking about real life, because real life is tragic and gritty and sad, and real life is confusing and overwhelming. So you need to find a way to touch on all these things, but pick one specific lesson that can encompass that feeling. So for Simba, it was, I have to learn how to fill my father's shoes. I have to learn how to accept responsibility and face the past and then move on from it. And I'm trying to think of another good coming of age story. I'm going back to my favorite fantasy book series, the Wingfeather Saga. This is another good story that it grows with you and it hits you differently every time you read it. My younger brother actually reads it every year for Christmas because I gave him the series for Christmas one year. And so now it's like a Christmas tradition that he rereads the saga every Christmas. And he has said over the past 2 years, every single time he reads it, he notices a new thing or something in the story strikes him differently. But in that story, the protagonist went from being a young boy living in a cottage, being so mad that his mother made him do schoolwork, to being an older brother who had to learn how to protect his younger siblings because that was his duty. He found out that his family was of royal blood and it was their responsibility. They had a special power to fight the evil entity that had taken over their entire world. So he had to learn how to put his own self-interest aside in order to protect his brother. And it shows you very honestly how he wrestles with that. Like, why should I have to bear the consequences for my younger brother's irresponsibility? But it's because it's his duty to protect. And so learning those things, they are hard lessons, and sometimes they're really frustrating because we don't want to accept that that's the way the world works. But when a story can show those lessons in a very honest way, there's a connection to it that we can all grasp onto because we've all been there.
That's a very good point about universality. I think for me, coming of age stories, so I actually want to specify something because I was thinking about this and I was like, no, personally, I don't find this particular film I'm going to say to be a coming of age story. Is that I think there is a very important difference between coming of age and loss of innocence types of stories. And they're connected, they're very similar, but I think the tone is a little different and the essence of it, because I think the film I was going to mention is Empire of the Sun, which is Steven Spielberg, which I have a very particular opinion on, but we do not have time to unpack all of that. But at the end of the story, it's almost like coming of age. We're like, look, the little rich British boy now knows the ways of the world. Okay, sure, but he feels kind of broken by it. And that's not bad. That's not a bad kind of story to tell, but it's a loss of innocence. I think for me, coming of age stories are meant to be positive because I mean, remember when you were a kid, right? And you look up at your parents or adults around you and they're like, well, I was a kid. And you're like, time out. You're a giant. How are you a kid? You weren't a kid once. That doesn't make any sense. And basically, it's kind of this idea. I think coming of age stories are these positive things. Trying to think like The Hobbit, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, certainly, about these stories of characters who come in to what they're not supposed to be, but can be. Which is why I think The Hobbit is a coming of age story, even though Bilbo in the story is like 50 years old or whatever. But so I don't think it has to be a youthful thing either. There's actually a rom-com. Oh, what was it called? It was with Anne Hathaway. I liked it too. It just came out. The Idea of You, where she framed it as a conversation that it was a coming of age story, even though the lady was 40 years old. So I think there is that sense. I think coming of age stories are about people coming into their own but they're so young they don't understand it. And I think it starts from a place of ignorance, a place of viewing the world is a certain way and it's going to be a certain way. And then they learn through their journey, oh, the world's not like that. It is a much more complicated, meaningful place. And that's why the coming of age stuff is all over the place, all over anime, all over books, young adult stuff. And I don't think it's because it's easy to write. I think it's tough, but it's meaningful because it's guiding people through that place of ignorance into a place of knowledge. So that's why, using what I was saying about with like The Hobbit, that you have Bilbo doesn't know what life is all like beyond the Shire, but at the end of the story, he's, you know, tricking dragons and doing all this stuff because he knows about the world now. So I think a coming of age story I think it's supposed to be, not exclusively, but I think it's supposed to be a positive thing of showing a character grow from a place of ignorance that only youth and inexperience can, and only experience can give you, becoming the person they were meant to be, the person that they've always had capable inside them. Because I think it's a way of telling young people that you can be something. Because you look at, as a young person, you think, well, I can never. Maybe you do, but it's like, I can't become that. So in this case here, Simba can't become king. He can't become a person, an adult like his dad, but he can. It just takes time and experience. That is the coming of age of learning, shedding ignorance for knowledge. I think that's kind of the essence there. Versus loss of innocence is the same thing, but I think it's like coming of age's darker twin. And I don't even mean that in a bad way, but I think that's sort of the staple hallmark of it, is moving from a place of ignorance to knowledge and becoming who you can be in a positive light through trials and discoveries and mistakes. Actually, an interesting way, on side note, mistakes are pretty important because I was a big fan when I was a kid of the Boba Fett books, which were chronicling his rise to becoming the great bounty hunter Boba Fett after Attack of the Clones. And he makes some mistakes, like big mistakes, but he learns from them. And I think that's all part and parcel of the coming of age narrative of becoming the person that they can be through their journey. I hope that makes sense, Jim.
I think good.
That is a very good distinction. I didn't even think of that distinction, but that is a really good point that you made.
It makes sense. It's an interesting point. It's an interesting perspective. I would say, I don't know if I agree. Only because to me, I think it goes the same way of romance, for instance, in the sense that you can have a happy ending romance and you can have a tragic romance. I think coming of age is the loss of innocence or the death of innocence as a genre, I think is more of a tragic coming of age tale. At least that's how I've always seen it, in the sense that I think you have, and I would also say that I don't know, in my opinion, the coming of age is more about a character becoming who they need to become, as opposed to becoming who they can become. And I agree that it definitely can be no matter what age. I think a lot of people do tend to automatically assume, oh, it's coming of age. It needs to be young adult, or it needs to be a little kid type of thing. But I think you can have a coming of age at 50 years old. It's really just about becoming who you need to be in order to understand the world as it is. For Simba specifically, I think Simba's story is a positive story to an extent, but it has a lot of negativity. It has a lot of, not negativity, but a lot of sadness within it as well. And so I think that overall, I think that the coming of age, and there are so many different coming of age stories where they have been rather tragic. Because I think that the tragic ones are an example of, yes, the character is still becoming who they need to be, but being broken by the world, maybe that's just who they need to be. Maybe they need to be able to see the world in that light in order to be able to function moving forward. But that being said, I'd like to break down Simba's journey throughout. And so when you look at the actual there's 3-act structure, if you will. Also, before I jump into that, I would say that the coming of age thing, I think it's much better to. I like the term rite of passage
Mm.
more than anything else because I feel like rite of passage strips the age from it, and it's more just about it's a crucible that a character must go through in order to get out the other side one way or another. And so I think that when you're writing a coming of age story, what you're really writing is a rite of passage story, and that can go either way as far as how it all turns out for a character. But specifically, Simba's journey, Act 1, we see Simba as the carefree, innocent individual who can't wait to be king, who is gullible, so gullible. That
Well,
whole
not as good as he thinks he is, because Nala
Mhm.
beats
yeah.
him.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
Simba's a little asshole. I'm not even gonna lie. He was a little asshole for so many reasons, and I was just like, oh come on, Simba, like seriously. And I got it. I understood, but yeah, you're a little asshole. But yeah, Simba. That whole Scar scene where Scar is pretty much like an elephant graveyard is no place for a young king or whatever he says, and Simba's just like
No
an elephant. What?
problem.
And it was hilarious because it was like
You run
I was
off and
dying
have a
laughing
good
because he's like, I promise. He's like, I promise I won't go there. And then the immediate next scene, he goes to Nala and he's like, I got a cool place I want to show you. I was like, damn, Simba, you didn't even wait a whole like another day, or like the next week. Or no, he was like, I promise, Uncle, I will not go there. I will never betray your trust. It's our little secret. I'm going over here to tell my best friend about this place that I just heard about, even though I promised I wouldn't. But I loved it because it was like, oh, that's the innocent. It's the innocence. It's the little kid. It's the naive thing. We've all done it. I know I've done that where like you promise your parents you won't do something and then you immediately go and do it. Anyway, at least me, I know I've done it so many times. I'm surprised I'm alive. That's how many times I've done it because I've done many things, and my mom said I could die doing, and I was like, I would never do that, Mom, and then immediately go and almost kill myself doing it. But that carefree innocence is his sort of call to adventure, and I wonder how would you say Simba's attitude at the beginning reflects the innocence and naivete of youth in general? I dropped some hints, some points, but were there any others that you guys captured that made you feel like it accurately represented youth and naivete and how writers can use that to sort of express that in their work?
I think that when you're young, you don't understand consequences. A lot of times the impulsivity is still there. Or impulsivity. English isn't working for me either.
Yep.
But you can't deny the impulse that you have towards adventure, towards experiencing the world firsthand, and getting having to think a step ahead and think, okay, if I choose to do this, what consequences might I encounter? That part of your brain isn't developed yet when you are going on this rite of passage journey. I really like how you said, Jared, that these stories are about becoming who you need to be, not who you should be, because that puts the urgency, the necessity on, like we were talking about, the point of no return. If your character could turn back from the journey that they're on, then it's not an important enough journey to pull your audience in. The stakes aren't high enough. It has to be a journey that they need to go on and they can't turn back from. So I'm going to stick with the rite of passage storyline. Because, yes, I will say a third time that these coming of age stories are not limited to a certain age. But, I mean, in real life, I've seen full-grown adults not understand consequences, and they have to have their own rite of passage, their own crucible that they go through in order to learn consequences.
Agreed.
Yeah, and for me, to that end, I think what's interesting is that Simba's whole setup of his youth is perfect because, yes, he's adventurous and he's fun and it's adorable, but the thing is, he thinks he's untouchable. Because when you're a kid, you think you're untouchable. And specifically, you think his dad saves him. That's what he relies on. And then his dad saves him again, and then he's gone. That sense of... And what's interesting is not all kids are like that. Not all kids have that sense of protection. The, shall we be honest and say, middle class suburbia protection. Not that middle class suburbia doesn't have its own dangers, but that's a different conversation. But I think that's what makes Simba really interesting, is that he, in terms of the rite of passage, is that he thinks this is the way life's always going to be. And what's really important, and again, we're building up to my hot take. It's not a hot take, by the way, but let's just teasingly call it that. It's not a hot take. But he thinks, and my dad's always going to be there, period. But that's not how the world works. Hence why I said, place of ignorance.
Yep.
Is that good, my
Good
teacher?
point.
Please tell me that's good. That's a Robot Chicken reference, everyone.
I think you're all right. I think you guys are absolutely right as far as that goes. And I think as for readers or writers, I should say, I think this is the act where you want to show off your characters, not just the how they interact with the world, but show their in this type of story. This is where we want to show that naive, impulsive, untouchable individual that the character believes they are. And I think that that's actually a common trait in most coming of age types of stories when you really think about how those are done. Same with To Kill a Mockingbird with Scout. Scout in the first act is very much believing that, you know, she's very right about most of the things that she believes. She's curious about a lot of stuff, but she's mostly just, she thinks she has it all figured out and everything makes sense in her little world. And I think that in your coming of age story, no matter how old your main character is, you have to kind of allow for that to be there. Let your character think they have it all figured out in the first act. Let them think that they have a full grasp on the way that the world is, and then shake that shit up in the worst possible way for them, which brings you to your second act, which is loss and escape. This is where Simba is forced to face reality. And it's sad. It's really sad when Mufasa dies. It was a sad moment, and that's an understatement. Most people were super sad about it.
I was in tears.
Yeah,
just 2 nights ago.
It seems that the horrible memories I have associated with this movie, and a lot of it coming from some really, really stupid people who are clear worshippers of Disney. I hate Disney. You're sure not acting like it. Despite all that, they still can't take away that sadness with this, which is, that tells you something, that it still really does mean something, and it's sad.
I would even say that the only moment that has ever been sadder to me in Disney growing up would be Bambi's mom getting killed, because although they don't show her getting killed, it's still super sad. The part that makes it most sad is just the fact that he calls out for his mom and she just doesn't respond. And that stuck with me because I had an irrational fear, and I don't think it's irrational now that I'm an adult, but I just had this crazy fear as a kid that my mom was going to die. I've always been. It's
What
always
kind
been
of
a thing.
media could possibly you have seen that gave you that fear?
Right. So
This is why my mom didn't let me watch Disney.
And I had this irrational fear that, like, one day I was a latchkey kid. So I came home on my own. I did those, and I had this irrational fear that one day I was going to be home. And there was also this book that I read in school. I can't remember the name of it, but where the kid's mom died. But I had this weird fear that, like, I was going to be at home and it was going to get past the time my mom was supposed to come home, and she just wasn't going to come home one day. And I was just not going to know what I was supposed to do and where. And as a 36-year-old man, I don't even know how old I am. Anyway.
That's how you know you're an adult.
61.
It's like I'm somewhere older. But even as an adult, I still, to this day, I still have that same fear of, like, if something happened to my mom, would I know what to do? Would I know how to handle that situation? And I told Jaylon about that too, about that experience I had when I was in school, about this young girl that I knew who I stayed with her after school to wait for her mom to pick her up, and her mom just didn't come. I remember I had to leave her because it was getting dark and I had to go, and I found out the next day that her mom was murdered. I remember how that stuck with me. I was in middle school when that happened, and I remember how that stuck with me that I was like, oh, parents die. Like, I thought that was just like yeah, I had already seen Bambi at that time. I had already seen Lion King at the time. So I thought, oh, that's just a thing that happens in the movies. But like, your mom doesn't really die. That doesn't really, or at least not until you're like an adult and you're like, you can take care of yourself and you know, buy your own groceries and, you know, do all that kind of stuff. I thought that was the extent of adulthood, buying groceries. You know, I didn't think that was a real thing. But then I was like, oh no, this person was the same age as me and they'll never see their mom again. So, and I remember how that hit me. And it didn't even happen to me, but I remember how that hit me. So when I watched this movie and I saw Simba lose his dad and worse, blame himself for it. Obviously manipulated into blaming himself for it, but nonetheless, that irrational behavior, the irrational thinking of a child. It was just it was a coming of age moment all in its own, of just kind of like, but it was a necessary coming of age moment. This is where we talk about what a character needs to happen, because we all need to accept death as a reality, that we're going to die, that the people we love are going to die. And as a child, I think it is important for you to learn those kinds of lessons as a kid better than it is to learn it as an adult. I didn't used to think that. I used to think, you know, when I have kids, I'm going to want to put off telling them about death as long as I can. But I realized the value of understanding that this life is not permanent is important. So Simba's reaction to that death, Simba's reaction to that blame on himself, do you feel that this was a coping mechanism for him, or do you think it was just an overall journey toward his growth in general? Or do you think it was both?
From personal experience, I have experienced guilt as a coping mechanism, and I have also manipulated myself into guilt, and I have also been manipulated by others into guilt. And there is the same destructiveness and the same sadness in all of those experiences, but they are very different. To me, something that really hit me in this movie was seeing Simba blame himself for such a tragic thing. And I know from experience that guilt like that is absolutely crushing. And I think the coping mechanism was him running away from the guilt because it is too crushing to sit under, especially when you are small. Like, not only was he young, but he was physically small. I think there's the moment where he steps into his father's paw is his father's paw print. Not only is it like he is too small to fill his father's shoes, but that smallness is very physical. It's a thing that you can see, which is an interesting thing when you watch a child grow to grapple with. But yeah, I see him running away as being the coping mechanism, because there is it's almost too common a response, too natural a response, to try and blame yourself for the sadness that you see in the world. Because there's a part of you that always says, I should be able to fix this. This isn't the way things should be. I should be able to fix it. And wanting to have that control, have that ability to fix it, can be both a blessing and a curse, because you have the power to do something about it. You have the power to face your past, but that's a lot. That's a lot to hold. And you have to go through the journey to become someone who is strong enough to hold that.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. That I will say, and maybe I was just dumb. I never understood Simba saying later, like, "Oh, I killed him," and again, I'll tackle that in a second later, because I was like, "No, you didn't. What are you talking about?" I personally, again, maybe I'm dumb. That's possible. It took me a long, long time to figure out that Simba was using, like, he feels guilty when he says that, because I don't think it was really presented well in the story for me. Like, I was very confused. I was like, what are you talking about? The way it's situated, I was kind of thought like he was up here and seeing Scar throwing Mufasa off, and I was very confused about that. But I say all that to say that I get the film's point now, and muddled in execution as I feel it may be, it is a really brilliant point of that, exactly what you said, Jilan, about running away from this guilt, because it's this idea of it only could be me. And I think that's a very interesting point, by the way. And I bring this up for the writing's sake of you can have so many different ways of interpreting things in a good way for, let your readers or audience members run free with interpretations.
Yeah.
Give them
These experiences of experiencing a rite of passage, experiencing a coming of age story are experiences we all have, but brains are weird and they're all different, and so they all interpret these experiences.
Because I think one of the things I thought when I was younger, I think when I was a teenager, was he goes like, oh, he tried to save me, so it was an accident, and that's why I killed him. And I think what's interesting is that for me, as I got older, I think it's less to do of if Dad wasn't in this place at this time, he wouldn't have died. And it is just that sense of, well, Dad's dead and I'm here. It must be my fault. The despair that can come from that. And so I think it is guilt. And then the coping mechanism is running because you just can't. You just gotta bury it down. And it's interesting. We really should talk about this at some point. But my favorite anime, one of my favorite shows, this life-saving piece of art, Cowboy Bebop, is a hell of a lot about that. It's a hell of a lot about the characters coming to realize they can't push off facing the past, or they can't. They have to. At some point, they have to, and coming around to that, because you can't bury everything. I heard once this was the phrase, that you can't bury things for too long because all it is just dirt. It's just dirt above the thing, and eventually the thing is going to come up from the dirt. So I think it's a brilliant piece of psychology in that sense from a personal end, because I think it is really reflective. And I think this is something else that's really important too, is that, okay, so let's get this out of the way. Okay, so one of the reasons I can't be this just Lion King thing was everyone always said, Lion King's like Hamlet. It's not. It's not. But
I would argue it's better.
it's the brother. Yes, the brother wants to kill the father. I'm like, yeah, but Simba doesn't mope around and then not kill his uncle and also tell his girlfriend to get thee to a nunnery. And that's my second Shakespeare reference in the past 2 episodes. And yada yada yada. And I go, but it's Hamlet. No, it's not. If anything, it's Moses. But what's interesting is everything I just said can technically be applied to this ancient mythical context, but everything I just said is actually quite human. It's very real contemporary stuff. So here's another real interesting tip. The reason why we're really into those myths is because they're very human. Like Moses, the story of Moses is dealing with God and enslaved people and a kingdom and Pharaoh and miracles and yada 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 yada. But strip it down to the bare essence, it is something that happens now. So that's something to keep in mind again of just endless experimentation. Don't get stuck in endless experimentation. You gotta put your foot down somewhere about what you're feeling. But in terms of just what you can do with material, there's so much to do that can be experimented on, and that's very exciting. So there's your fun fact.
Very good.
I agree. I will say this. I will say that I think too that it's one. I think that Simba handles it the way that obviously a young person would handle it. I always interpreted it as Simba sees it as his fault because it's a situation where if he was where he was supposed to be and doing what he was supposed to be, it's not even that, because he was under the impression that his dad knew he was supposed to be there. So it wasn't like he ran off and did something he wasn't supposed to be doing and his dad died, trying to save him. It was more of a but it was a situation where his dad, in his mind, his dad died once again, trying to save him. Once again, putting himself in between his actions, and that if Simba had just, that also keeping in mind that Simba was told by Scar to stay on the rock, right? And then Simba gets off the rock and then and this is more of a small technical thing, but if you really think about it, Simba does get off the rock and he starts chasing that little fucking lizard thing, and then that's when the bad thing happens. So I mean, logically, as a child, you might even think, I once again disobeyed. Once again, this is what happens. And so I get that. I will say that this is another example of, in your second act, when your character loses their loss of innocence and they get that they suffer the consequences of this world problem that they're having, let them handle it wrong. And I think this is kind of the way that it should be in most stories, but in this particular type of story, let them handle it wrong. Because if you really think about it, it's a realistic response. Because realistically, if I believe that I have the world figured out, and then somehow I am proven in the worst way possible to be wrong, I am not equipped to handle it correctly. I'm not equipped to deal with it in a way that is mature, responsible, whatever. Because if I could, then the story would be over. So I think that at the end of the day, make sure your character doesn't know. They can either, one, know the way to handle it, which I think works better for adult characters in a coming of age story, where they know the way to handle it, but they choose to buck against it and do the opposite because they're not ready emotionally to deal with it. Or if they're a child, they just don't know the right way to handle it, so they do it the only way they know how. And I think that works well. In the act 3 is the return and acceptance, which is where Simba sees his dead dad in the spirit realm, if you will. He pulls a T'Challa, and he sees his dead dad, and his dad is like, figure out, remember who you are, get your shit together, Simba. This is, you've been a slacker for many, many years in the jungle. Oddly enough, there's a jungle when they live in Africa, but it's fine.
From the savannah to the jungle.
Which makes no sense, but it's fine.
The savannah, you can run all the... Okay, hang on. Can we stop this for a second? Because this is something I need to discuss. This is something I need to discuss. Sorry, I didn't know where to interrupt you, but I'd like to hear your take on this, Jared. Okay, so here's the thing. So they're in the savannah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like Central-ish Africa or Southern. I'm not exactly sure. Bear with me. But you can, because Africa is a vastly complex ecosystem, right? You can run from a savanna up to a jungle. That's not the thing. Here's what I'd like to hear your take on. Why does seemingly Simba, when he comes back, cross the Sahara?
I noticed that too. I was like, hang on.
So the thing is as a kid, right? The awesome music, boom, 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 and and it's only for like this one shot, but then it's like an overlay of the other shot. It just kind of fascinates me. It's such a cool detail of showing how long the passage is. Great, but if you stop to think about it, I'm like, did he go in a... I'm trying to figure out like a circle or this. It's just, I was just curious.
My biggest problem is that it's not so much that I think that there's no jungle in Africa. My biggest problem is that I don't understand how a little lion cub managed to make it all the way to a jungle. If we are to understand that when Simba does run back to the Pride Lands, it's taking him quite a few days to get there based on the time lapse that they're using. At least that's how I've interpreted it. It was taking him a couple days to like run across this desert and get back to the Pride Lands. How did the little cub who doesn't know how to hunt, who doesn't know how to do any of those things on his own, manage to get all the way to where he ended up with Timon and Pumbaa? I just never understood how he did that. Logically, it just didn't make any sense to me. I was like, he should have been dead a lot earlier than he was. But I mean, it's fate, it's lucky.
I was going to say, to quote, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, I think the episode is trying this work. Stop questioning everything, you bitch.
Fair enough. I'll take that.
Our job to find plot holes.
I'll take it. It's fine. So him running back to, he gets his life together after being a slacker for many years, and his insta love that he has with Nala. Side note, I understand that it's Disney, and I understand that like you don't have enough time to like really create a romantic subplot between these two characters, and I know that she was his childhood friend, but like he literally said, she's my best friend. And then they ran off into the jungle together and it was just like, we're in love. I was like, wait, All these years, you've always seen her as your best friend, your best buddy. That's it. And then you're just like, oh no, we're in love in the jungle. And there's that. And then there was also just, I felt like that scene was incredibly freaky deaky for for an animated Disney movie. I was like, well, I was like, the way she looked at him, I was like, I've seen that look before. That shouldn't be in a kid's movie. What is this? It's like, wait a minute.
Okay, but
So you are
Timon's
admitting
song.
that this movie is not actually as perfect as the internet and the culture would make you think.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's all I needed. That's all I needed.
No, I was with you, Charles. Yeah, but can we just say, like, first of all, I can't say nothing because I hate the insta-love trope, but I have lived the seeing someone as my best friend for 10 years and then suddenly one day admitting that he's not.
Yeah.
So
Fair.
I'm going to excuse myself from that rant.
Fair. So Jaylon and Ben are Simba and Nala, and that is you guys' name from now on.
But it wasn't that, like, that explicit. I can't do looks like that. I agree. That's like...
Because old school Disney used to be thirsty AF.
It really was. That is true.
This is the joke I say when I watch that kind of stuff. I go, it's like, let's really screw the kids up. If we ever get around to Atlantis, okay? Holy crap.
Yo.
It's just a
I've not seen it, so we're gonna have to watch it, and I'm gonna have to tell you. But like, yeah, I watched it. I watched it yesterday. I watched Lion King yesterday, and I was watching that scene, and I was like, I'm a little uncomfortable watching this because I'm like, wait, like I have no problem with spice. I have no problem with sexual content in a film. I have no problem with it. But I wasn't mentally prepared for it because I was like, this is a Disney movie. This is The Lion King. I watched this as a kid. There is nothing wrong with this. And then Nala fell on her back and was looking up at Simba. And I was like, wait a minute. I now understand why I had a crush on Nala growing up. I had a crush on a lion. I had a crush on a lion yesterday. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, oh my goodness, I wish I was a lion.
I didn't freak anyone out with my love story. We weren't freaky like that, but we did make my siblings sing the song that Timon did where he was grieving no, our trio is now a duo. We're losing our power.
I get that. But yeah, so with the whole return and acceptance thing and Simba making it back to the Pride Lands, calling out his uncle, finding out the truth about what really happened on that rock, I killed your father, which
Star
to this
Wars.
day is still a bar to me. I don't know why, but I just love the way that he did it. He's like, now for first of all, Jeremy Irons. Is that Jeremy Irons?
Jeremy Irons.
No. What?
Jeremy Irons.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right. So Jeremy Irons is the bomb when it comes to, like, in this movie, he is fantastic as Scar. Just oh my god, Scar is my favorite villain of all time. I also will say, side note, it is hilarious that Zazu says that he would make a handsome throw rug, but then if you watch the movie Hercules, he's actually a throw rug. So which is hilarious. And I never knew that until later on when I saw Hercules later on, and I was like, wait a minute, that rug, that shawl that Hercules has is Scar. And I was like, wait a minute. And then when I heard the Zazu line, I was like, that's hilarious. But overall, the whole now for my little secret, I killed your father, or I killed Mufasa, was just it hit me in the feels, but it made me mad, it made me so many things. It was a lot of emotions that I felt, and I was like, I knew he did it, I saw him do it, but like still, it was like, oh, how dare you son of a bitch. And then the way, like, they all just, like, jumped him and beat him. And then, of course, Scar's death, which I always hated it because I always felt like Scar should have been smarter than to because Scar, the way they paint Scar is that he is this like ahead of it, 10 steps ahead of everybody else. He's the mastermind of everything. And it's just like that whole him shrinking back into, it was the hyena's fault thing just seemed so beneath him. Like, at the very least, you would think that he would have been like, I know that if this doesn't work out, I'm going to have to rely on them. And they're currently over there fighting everybody, so someone might hear what I'm saying. So I probably should. Maybe I'm thinking too much into it, but like, I don't know. I'm really big on Machiavellian maneuvers and things like that, and I just kind of think that sounds so horrible. But I just think that it's interesting. That being said, what do you think was the defining moment that made Simba embrace his destiny? Do you think it was that whole James Earl Jones moment where he's talking to his dad? Do you think it was something else? Because I always felt it wasn't as clear as to what exactly made him go back. I do know that, yes, the conversation with his dad was a big part of it, but then I always wondered, was Nala a part of that as well? Was it just, his realization? Was it the parting words of Rafiki about, you can either learn from it, you can run from it, or you can learn from it? What was it? What do you guys think the defining moment was for him?
I feel like he gave it away when he said, when I think it was Sarabi or Nala asked him, "Why'd you come back?" And he said, "I finally had some sense knocked into me." So yeah. I think he gives away that it was Rafiki with his...
Fair enough.
Yeah, because honestly, I always felt the climax of this movie was a little wonky, to be honest, like in that sense of like, Simba comes back, and then he goes, "No, I killed him." But as a kid, I was like, why don't you tell him exactly what you saw? That's something in movies that always drives me nuts. People go like, "I killed him." I'm like, yes, but there was more context. They just go, "I killed him." I'm go, no, always drives me nuts.
Yeah.
And I think it started with this movie. And then, he's getting pushed over the edge, and then he almost dies, and then he only gets like, it's almost like he goes, "Oh God, what am I doing?" Right. And then somehow I was able to jump, and I don't know, it always kind of bugged me where it's like he needed to.
Yeah, that jump. I'm sorry, but that jump was crazy.
Yeah.
The way he's hanging off the thing and he's just
Both
like,
biceps.
super leap. It's like, how did you do
Yeah,
that?
and then
Why didn't you do that from the beginning? I don't
no,
understand.
even the whole thing with the lionesses, like all of a sudden they start killing because okay, we now have proof. I guess what I'm saying is I guess I needed Simba to like stand up for himself regardless of what may have been. But it's like it just feels very goody goody two shoes. Like, okay, all the chickens are lined up in the row. Now we can go and rebel. Now, and I always kind of bugged me with Simba. But to that end, yeah, I agree with Jalen. I think it is Rafiki and Nala and his dad sprechen the truth and getting him to realize, yeah, I have to. And I think that's why the climax, for me, maybe emotionally, because it's like, how would you fix it? Good question, not sure. But emotionally, I think maybe the Pride Rocks climax shouldn't have been about him learning something new and then going, haha, it should be, haha, period. But again, we're getting into my not hot take, but I don't want to like take over the conversation. So
I do think it is very interesting how the deciding moment for him is not a one moment. It's a bunch of things that kind of come together, because that's a lot more realistic than just suddenly you have this one single light bulb moment. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times, especially when you are going on the journey of becoming who you need to be, there's all these little things that add up. And it's hard to show that in a dramatic movie that's only 2 hours long, that's supposed to have a very clear arc of
this
like,
movie's 80 minutes, by the way.
Fair. Even more impressive.
It's insane what they accomplished in this movie in 80 minutes.
Yes.
Which tells a lot about what a lot of these long-winded movies need to take a lesson from.
Our long-winded podcasts.
Yeah. Wow. Shots fired.
I was shooting at myself.
She shot it. She shot the podcast. It's fine.
You did first.
You're right. Fair enough. I'm guilty as well. But yeah, no, I agree with you guys wholeheartedly. I like that point that you made, Jaylon, about how it is a series of moments that ultimately led to his decision to go back. And I think that that's something that our writers, I keep saying readers, our writers can learn as well, is that idea that that it doesn't have to be a specific beat that a character experiences in order to come away with the thought or the realizations or whatever it is they need to do. It could be a series of things that lead up to that one thing, that lead up to that defining moment. So I agree with that. This is one of those things that I would say the third act is where you definitely want your character to finally figure out the right way to handle this. And if you want to tell a tragic coming of age story. Have them figure out the right way to do it, but then have them reject it and do the opposite.
And to that, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
I was going to that, and maybe that's what I need is instead, I think to kind of this rite of passage, I think maybe that you do need to challenge your protagonist. So like going back to myth here, the way it was told to me is the Buddha, when he becomes enlightened, he starts preaching, and the first people reject him after he's already been enlightened, right? Challenge what the knowledge is. So to that, and maybe what's always kind of bugged me about the climax of The Lion King is that immediately Scar starts running him over, getting him to think weirdly, and he's like, "No, I'm not a murderer." And then it cuts to him and the hyenas pushing him over the cliff. Maybe I needed Simba to stand up and go like, "Nah, F you. I'm not gonna take this," and be challenged a little bit more than run over. Which is all to say that I think also you can challenge that character, because once you have that aha moment or moments, it's not easy automatically, and that's part of learning life, that it takes time. So I think that's another thing you can do in a climax and challenge people.
I think in line with that too, I think this is an interesting thing I think you should try to do, is in line with that is when your character does identify what the answer is. One of the things we always talk, when you talk about it, it's talked about a lot in writing circles, and we talk about it a lot at One Brain Arc, specifically in the stuff that I write, is the lie that your character believes. Every story starts with a lie that your character believes. By the end of the second act, going into the third act, specifically the end of the second act, your character discovers the truth. And I think the best stories are the ones where the character learns that the thing that they believed was a lie that they believed this whole time. They learn the truth, they embrace it, and then in the third act, you challenge them. You challenge that lie, and it's almost like we were just talking about this earlier, Jaylon and I, about the whole in life. The universe wants you to have all the things that you want. It's just that it's going to throw things at you that are going to test and see how bad you want it. In story, I think it works the same way. You have a character that believes a lie and then finally accepts the truth about that thing. And then the universe throws its biggest challenge at you, which is your climax moment. And that's the biggest challenge, to test and see, did you truly learn? I think sometimes what's really, really interesting is when a character is able to retreat from that thing, where they sort of go back to that lie as their comfort zone before. And I think Simba does that in this movie, where when he leaves Rafiki and he goes back to the Pride Land, in his mind, he's a new man. I'm no longer, I'm strong enough to be a king. I'm strong enough to stand on my own 4 feet, I guess. I'm strong enough to do the things that I need to do. And then he runs into Scar, and Scar just immediately slaps him around with the whole, like, you're a liar, you killed your dad, you're all this, and he immediately starts to backpedal a little bit, and is kind of like, but wait a minute, maybe I'm not who I thought I am. And it's not until in this weird way, it's not until the confession of what Scar did, that he realizes, oh, wait a minute, I am strong enough to beat him. I am strong enough to do this, and I'm going to. And I think you can do that with your own character. Let them believe the truth. Let them think they have it all figured out again. And that's really the arc of a character. You think you have it all figured out. You find out you really don't. Finally think you have it figured out, and then that new belief is challenged, and you either accept it and say, I'm strong enough to stand against it, or you fail to do so, and then that becomes a tragic ending. But that's ultimately the coming of age story in a little bite-sized soundbite that you can use to figure out how to tell your coming of age story. The last question I will ask you guys before I let Charles give us his hot take.
It's not a hot take, I swear. I'm just using that terminology for safety. I don't think that's right. Sorry.
Come on, we've beat down this podcast enough. We need some clickbait here. We need something to keep people here.
What parts of Simba's journey do you guys think most people can relate to in their own lives?
Oh, when he goes with Rafiki to chasing him down like that whole thing ties into what I have to say, which it's not, well, I don't know, maybe it is profound from I always hear about this movie. But I think it's that part of the sense that he's lost and there's no answers. But there is if he just keeps going a little bit more, a little faster. And that whole sequence is so gosh dang perfect. Oh my gosh, sorry. The whole bit. And side note, by the way, when he goes, "I'm going back," Rafiki's cheering. That music, I swear, if I'm watching a baseball game and there's a beautiful home run hit or something, that's the music that plays in my head. I don't know why, but it's exactly how it feels.
Yep. Yep.
Also, side note, by
The
the
movie
way,
does have a
the
great score, by the
credits
way.
sequence of this movie is freaking amazing. Where it's this big old thing at the end, and then like it cuts to black, and it still has this awesome music going on, and then Elton John's song plays. Is so perfect, like so perfect. Like the only other movie that does that keeps the party going is Hercules. But that's a very different vibe. Not a bad vibe. It's just a different vibe. But
I am such a in the early 2000s actually it wasn't just in the early 2000s, but that was when I first fell in love with it. I was always the weirdo who wanted to stay and watch the credits because of whatever epic song they were playing or whatever sequence they were doing at the end. And everyone else like turn it off and I'm like, "No, keep watching. It's not done yet."
yeah, I do that now. I didn't do that as a kid, but now I'm like, oh no, what am I doing? Like I used to skip over the Spider-Man 2 opening credits, and I'm like, you moron child. Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, actually. So just all the Spider-Mans. I'm like, no, you fool, you fool. So I get that.
I do think I already said I can relate to the childhood moment or the innocent moment of having to watch your innocence die and come face to face with how terrible the world really is, and also the guilt and how devastating it is to blame yourself for that, and then the coping mechanism of running away in order to protect yourself from having to face that. I really love the hope in coming of age stories where they show the beauty in doing the hard thing, or another way to put it, that doing the hard thing can lead to beautiful outcomes, even if it's not the way you would think of a happy ending being. For Simba, he probably thought that he wanted a happy ending where he could go back to the past, go back to being that innocent child with both his parents. But when he learned the lesson that he needed to learn to be the person that he needed to be, I say person, they're people, they're real beings, but he has to accept a different kind of happy ending and accept the beauty in that. And I think that that's something that is also very significant in a coming of age story, because a lot of times the happy ending that we want looks different and even more hauntingly beautiful than the happy ending that you initially would have dreamed up in your innocence.
That's very well
I think
said.
that's good. It is, yeah. I think you both have. I don't even have anything to say compared to what you guys just said. You guys are spot on. I will say this though, just now that I just noticed this, for anybody who's watching this, if you noticed that there was like a foot in the background,
I was going to mention that a couple weeks ago because I know what it is, but I saw it and I was like, he's going to have to explain this at some point.
I never noticed that it was there until just now when I was like, there's literally a foot behind me. Yeah, it's not a person. I'm not
That's what you
I'm
say.
not a serial killer or anything, I promise. It's a mannequin that I used for filmmaking training, for lighting training. But yeah. Sorry about that. I was listening to Jaylon talk about that meaningful statement, and I'm like, I lean in to like hear Jay, and then I'm like, wait a minute, is that a foot? Like, has that always been there? That's like, have I been recording these episodes and like nobody's pointed out there's a foot behind me?
Sorry, I didn't. I let the joke play out. As long as the foot's not in my mouth, because usually my foot's in my mouth.
It was yeah, it was when she was playing the long game apparently. Of just waiting, just like one day he will notice. So, but yeah, so that I mean, were you able to? Did you say was that your hot take? The thing you said before, or
No,
did you not get a chance to say
no.
it?
And
Okay,
actually,
Here's the
I was thinking, I'm like, no, I don't think we have time for this, and I think it's a funny story or an interesting story, but I don't think it is. But now that I think about it, it might actually be applicable to talking about this right past. Stick with me here. This is going to sound like I'm crazy and jerky, but I have a really good point here. So I think the whole conversation about The Lion King being about responsibility is absolute crap. Wait, stay with me. This is what I mean. Everyone's like, well, he has to accept his responsibility in the circle of life. I'm like, okay. So there's side note. Okay, again, I keep mentioning You're the Worst. There's a bit in You're the Worst where the boyfriend Jimmy says Hakuna Matata, and Gretchen, his girlfriend, means, you mean no worries? And he goes, well, that's a very very simple way of interpreting it, but you could argue basically she plays it up. He doesn't know what the Lion King is because he's a pretentious little writer guy. So he doesn't know what the Lion King is. He's like, oh, this is this ancient, or not ancient thing. I don't think it's either. I can't remember which language it is, but he doesn't pick it up. And I'm like, that's like the whole thing of this movie. Everyone's like, Sick of Life, Hakuna Matata. It's like, no, you don't know philosophy. This is pop. This is back of a cereal box philosophy. And this whole thing about responsibility, I'm like, I don't know. He suffered a trauma, and the lesson is he needs to buck up or something. And that really always kind of bugged me. Like when I started hearing, because I started hearing this as a teenager, but it's like, it's about responsibility, taking his place. And I'm like, okay, what, to be a king? What does he do as a king? He kicks the other guy's ass, roars on a rock. Ta-da! What the hell? Like, what does he learn about responsibility to lead his people or whatever? And it's like, well, he has to go back. And I'm like, he suffered a trauma and no one was there except Senior Psychopath. How is that him needing to accept responsibility? Because he never learned anything. And I always thought, like, I'm like, I don't know. I just felt there was Spider-Man. So many more stories about responsibility that were made major. And I was like, okay, that just might be a weird thing. And then I start watching these making ofs. And that's all these people are talking about. They're like, it's my responsibility and responsibility. And I was like, the what? It's about him becoming king. I'm like, he's going to become king because it's his line. It's his inheritance. So it's almost like the big responsibility of inheriting the mansion. Yay! I don't get it. And apparently this is the interpretation of the movie. And I was like, have I been watching this movie differently the whole time? Because the reason I bring this up is I think, tell me if this actually is a rite of passage. And this is an example of how many different kinds of rite of passages there are, different types of stories. Is I always thought the number one thing about this movie, it's not a big deal, but the number one thing, not responsibility, was death and grief. Because I will tell you, this movie is one of the 3 animated things that taught me about death at a young age, which is weird because the first one was Gargoyle, which is the episode with Anubis when ancient Egypt, or not ancient Egypt, but they go to Egypt. And basically, in that episode, there's a guy who's trying to use Anubis to resurrect his son, and Anubis tells him, them's the breaks. That's it. It's done. And I was a huge fan of Gargoyle. Still am a huge fan of Gargoyle. But I remember this was the late 90s, and I was really little, and I was like, oh, Gargoyles is telling me this. That's really hardcore. And the second was The Iron Giant, which, Jalon, please tell me you've seen The Iron Giant. Okay.
Am I
You have to see that one. You have to see that
forever
one.
too, permanently?
That's my baby. That might be my favorite film if I had to pick one. That's my baby. But that one also has a really profound thing of this is not the end. There's more to existence than just this. That was really profound because again, I'm a little kid, and that was really strange to say. But then in this movie, even with Littlefoot's mom in Land Before Time, her spirit is there at the end, but mostly he's alone. And that was kind of hard of imagining that, with my mom and even my dad, and that was tough. But The Lion King was the first thing that had that about like, no, they're not gone. They're still with you. And it's funny too, because even in the back of my brain as a kid, I was like, no, that's just hokey dokey bullshit. But what's interesting is it's actually true. Honest to God, hand over my heart, that is actually a more truer statement than you'd think, that the people are still there with you in your conscious, in your mind, no matter what. And it's like, as I say this because basically between The Lion King, that Gargoyles episode, and The Iron Giant, until I became an older teenager and developed horrible mind-crumbling anxieties, I kind of got the whole package on death, and plus Star Wars, I guess, too, on death and accepting death at a really young age. And I owe it a lot to this movie. And so to that end, I've always seen the story of basically Simba. I mean, literally, Mufasa tells him that one day the sun will set on my time here. He basically tells in the first conversation, I'm gonna die, son. And Simba goes, okay. And then he asks him again, we're gonna be like this forever, right? And his dad tells him this whole thing about the stars. And, which, by the way, I thought was real, by the way, as a little kid. And because one of my earliest memories is going outside at night before bed to look up at the stars. So I thought that was a real thing, which it still is, but, more complex now. And again, Mufasa tells him, I'm still going to be here with you, but I won't be here physically forever. And then this horrible thing happens, and he's consumed with guilt, and Simba completely loses all those lessons because he's so upset. That's why his song, what is it called? Simba's extra song in the Broadway show. I cannot remember what it is called, but it's a beautiful song. It's a lot about that, of that sense of dad was supposed to be here. My parent was supposed to be here. Now my life is screwed up forever, and the only thing to do is sit with my wonderful adopted gay parent in the jungle doing nothing because I have no life. My life is over. My dad died. Trauma. My life is over. Death is the only thing. That's it. It's over. It's done. And him learning that isn't true. There is more, that he belongs back home and he belongs with his mother, with his people, to do something more, that his life isn't over. I thought was a much, much more profound thing. And so when I was hearing all this stuff about responsibility, like, he has to become a king, I'm like, he doesn't know how to do taxes or whatever the savannah equivalent is of taxes. Political parties between the elephants and the giraffes, and, but there's always that one racist giraffe, blah, blah, blah. But that I always thought that was the takeaway, was that acceptance of your life isn't over just because someone you love died, and you can keep going. And that was the whole thing of the circle of life, that concept of it doesn't just stop. It goes on and keeps going. It's okay. And I thought that was a much more profound thing. And now that I bring this up, I guess now that I think about it, that is a rite of passage. That is a coming of age. But it's a different kind of one. Which I guess is all to say is, I think there's so many ways to tackle this particular subject, but it still goes from that place, at least in my interpretation, from ignorance to knowledge. And the trials of getting to that point is the big kick. So sorry if I got a little serious there, because it's actually really special. And,
no, it's good.
And it's funny because, again, I always think about that with my mom of like, because it was Disney, you couldn't avoid this movie. It was the 90s.
Yeah, of course.
It's still today. You couldn't avoid it. But like, for me in my head, my connection of that is with my mom, because, I mean, she had like all the Lion King merch, like these toys and stuff, because she just loved it. So I just think of there's certain feels of the plastic toys and the plush toys and stuff. I think of my mom with this movie, so that's just something I think about that. But yeah, that's my, not my hot take, but like, I think every time I hear it's like, it's about responsibility, I go, no. Not no, but like, it's not how I interpret it. But I think it is a rite of passage now that I think about it. Just for me, completely different way.
I think it's important. I think that the learning lesson here too is that you can interpret. That's the whole thing about stories. They can be interpreted so differently from different people. I agree with what you're saying. I do think that it is a story about grief and acceptance and death and learning to. But I also think it is a story about responsibility, in the sense that the lesson that Simba learns is that to be I say it's less about just responsibility. It's more about a boy learning to become a leader. And that's what he learns. And that he learns that he learns the hardest lesson of being a leader. And that's horrible shit will happen, but you can't give up, because people will count on you. People will rely on you. And yes, I agree. There are so many other things that go into being a leader, so many other things that go into being a king than just that. But it's one of the most important lessons that a leader has to learn, is that things will not always go according to plan, and that tragic things will happen. You will lose people, you will lose things, but you have to keep going forward, that you're not alone, that you'll still make it through. And that's what it takes to be a good king, is the ability to say that you're going to have You're going to have elephants that have revolts. You're going to have gazelles that do what they're going to do, but you're going to have to
That would have
learn
been
to
a
deal
really
with it.
cool cartoon, by the way. You know what we got? We got the Timon and Pumbaa cartoon, which, by the way, I watched a lot as a kid. See, that's what's so weird about this movie is like I give it a semi hard time, but I know all of the stuff.
But I think that's the lesson that he ultimately learns is that you can't run away from things when things go bad.
Yeah,
and
that I agree with too.
That's the lesson that a king has to learn, because when you are a king, you can't just be like, fuck it. Because if you really think about it, Simba didn't really have to come back. And if he didn't come back, it wouldn't have been, it would have been sucky for the pride, but it wouldn't have been any skin off his back in the end if he was just like, I'm just going to stay out here and live a carefree life and never do anything. He didn't have to inherit the throne if he didn't want to. He took the responsibility of coming back and facing his problems and facing the things that he was running away from, facing his trauma, facing his uncle, facing the disappointment of leaving his mom and girlfriend behind and all of those kinds of things, and sort of in a whole kingdom that was relying on him to do his duty. That was the responsibility that he ultimately got. So I think that it's ultimately a story about death, but I think it's also a story about leadership and responsibility learned through the lesson of death. So I don't think you're wrong. I think they're sort of coiled and wrapped up in one another.
It is a heavy responsibility to have to learn how to grieve well, because knowing how to grieve in life is very difficult, and
for sure
it takes emotional maturity, it takes bravery to face, and it takes bravery to hold and process thoroughly. So I think that there is responsibility in learning how to grieve death, but I really want to get on the bandwagon of Charles's theory, because the whole, like, all these little details leading up to the death and the life, and there's still, you can still move on after death, I see it so perfectly.
I do too. This
has a lot to do with some backhanded trauma from this movie. Okay, I had a really
but it still makes
high
sense.
school year.
But it still makes sense, and I do think that yes, Mufasa was teaching Simba how to come to grips with the idea that one day he wouldn't be there. But I also think he was trying to teach him that not only am I not going to be here, but you're going to deal with a lot of heavy stuff. I deal with heavy stuff. As your father, I deal with it. I have the when he tells him, it's being king is about more than just getting your way all the time. You have to kind of deal with those other things. But I push forward regardless of how hard it is. And I want you to be able to do that one day, because that's going to be your responsibility. And Simba doesn't get that, obviously, the entire time that he keeps telling him. Simba keeps thinking, the point of being king is doing what you want, running here, no one telling me I have to be here or stop that or do these kinds of things. That's his idea of what a king is. And it's not until he's an adult and Nala comes and Rafiki comes and they all point out, being a king is showing up. That's what it is. It is being here and doing that. That's what being a king is about.
Which I guess to that, and I guess it's less. I guess what's always bothered me then is the interpretation of responsibility to the throne, everybody, but responsibility to yourself and others. Like if you exchange the words, at least for me, king with man, suddenly a lot of that makes sense.
It makes sense.
So maybe that's just another thing. The strange journey of me in this film I'll have to the day I die, I tell you.
So all of that said, we are going to wrap things up. I was going to do some trivia, but we're not going to do it today.
Trivia.
Charles wins. Moving on.
So the last thing we'll do our recommendations. And also, this show is still evolving and changing and growing and becoming whatever it's meant to be. It's going through its own rite of passage as we speak. So this time we learned, I do think that the whole one topic is the way to go. We'll just change some of the lowering the question amount so that we can come into either an hour or a little bit over an hour, because we still hit almost 2 hours in this episode, but it's fine. We have a lot to say about this stuff, and I love that.
If you want us to shut up and stop the podcast, give us money or work to get money, and we will stop. This is all in your hands.
It's your power. It is your power. As soon as you hire us and you do, the podcast will become less important, and we will So yeah, I agree with Charles. You want us to shut up, give us money. In fact, that's gonna be the sign that we put on for the podcast logo from now on. Want us to shut up, give us money, podcast. But anyway, what are your guys' recommendations for this week?
I recommend Vox Machina as a show that it doesn't trifle with death. It doesn't use the trope of minimizing the gravity of death by always bringing back characters who died. So far. I was deeply saddened by a death, but I had this entire conversation with my husband where I was like, I kind of hope he doesn't come back, because I will be mad if he does, and they trivialize something as heavy as death in that way. But anyway, it's an amazing show. Yeah. But yeah, it's an amazing show. You'll love it.
Again, I've had a really, really difficult week, so I've been really a lot of loops here. But I did have the thought after last episode to mention this, so I will say I recommend the cartoon series Gravity Falls, which is hilarious. I've been a fan of it for a long time, and the creator and the two lead actors were doing a charity for the LA fires with their characters and stuff, and it was really sweet. And I was reminded of how well bloody written that show is, how deviously hilarious it is, and how remarkably depthful it is about many things of relationship and growth. And it is the bee's knees. Gravity Falls, everyone. Get on it. Have you two seen this show?
I have not. I've heard of it, but I've not seen it.
It's going on my...
You know how I am about cartoons.
It's very,
very, very hard for me to get into cartoons. However, I've been on a cartoon kick, so this might be the best time to get while I'm still doing it, while I'm still like enjoying cartoons. I think House of the Dragon was like the first live action thing that I've watched in a couple of weeks now. So this might be the best time for me to actually check it out. I also watched the entire series of, well, as it is so far, up to right now, the Harley Quinn series, which is also incredibly hilarious. And I didn't think it was going to be, but it's actually really funny.
Let us laugh.
No, actually, no, that's not it. The long story short, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just throwing my 2 cents in there. My personal thing is, actually, I thought that show was hilarious until I think it was season 4. I think it was the one that came out. It was the last new one before the new one that just came out, and I feel they really dropped the ball on the characters and the comedy and the writing and the characters. So I feel betrayed by that show.
I hate when they do that.
Fair enough. But yeah, so that it was pretty funny. I am that kind of guy with that kind of humor. I love dirty, raunchy, disrespectful humor. It makes me giggle like a little girl, and I have no shame in it. Overall, yeah, I've been watching cartoons and anime and all of that for the most part. Only thing I saw that actually, you know what? I was wrong. House of the Dragon. The other thing that I watched that I highly recommend people watch, I guess this is my recommendation, is Anora, the movie Anora. I did not think I was going to like it. One, because I have no problem with sex workers and things about sex work. I don't see myself. I have no personal connection to it. There's no resonance between me and sex work and that kind of stuff. So I always find myself just not really super interested. But the way that this was done, it looked, when I first saw it, I was turned off immediately because it looked like a low budget movie. And I was just like, oh, this is low budget. But the more I got into it, the 25-minute home invasion scene is both hilarious and sad, and just, I feel like the guy who directed the movie just set up the camera and was just like, you guys just do whatever you want to do, just improvise. I feel like there was no dialogue. Like, there was nothing written in that scene. I feel like whoever wrote it was just like, wrote 25 pages of just like, here you could just do this and here you could do that. Because it felt so real, the way that she was, Mickey Madison, I think her name is, the way that she did that, her whole performance was great, but in that particular scene, it was some of the best acting work I have ever seen in my life. I was just like, is this a movie or is this like a bunch of people that got together for improv? It was really good. And overall, it's just a really great movie. And so I recommend that movie. I think we actually had one of our writers who wrote an article about the movie. And it wasn't why I chose to see it, but I had heard about it. And now I want to go back and read their article, I should say. Which is only me telling on myself that I don't always read our articles. So
You read the ones you write. That's the most important part.
I'm selfish like that. So yes. But yeah, so that would be my recommendation. As far as what we are going to watch next week, I don't know yet. I do know that we will probably, unless we did say something before and we did not.
I was going to bring up that movie that Charles called me out for not seeing.
The Iron Giant.
What's the?
I don't have an Iron Giant thing on my desk. Otherwise, this was Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
You did mention that.
that.
I would say I did see Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. I saw it. I hated it. So.
Oh, Jared, we can't be friends anymore, man.
I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry.
What?
We're just kicking all of ourselves off the podcast.
No, that's wrong. That's wrong.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We will discuss it. We can discuss it. However, I do really want to watch The Iron Giant because I saw it I think it was the first time because of Charles's recommendation on Deja Vu podcast, and it really spoke to me, and I really want to see Jaylon's response to it because it is it's a good movie. So right. Let's do that. We'll do that one.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do The Iron Giant. If you don't like that one, then
Then you are in fact off the
podcast forever, and you'll never find me again ever.
And then I guess the week after that we can do Pinocchio, and then the week after that we'll do Star Wars.
Well, I don't want to hear you criticize Pinocchio. Except for Star Wars.
he's like protecting it. Just make sure you put it away for that episode, so it's out of earshot.
You give it earmuffs.
I know what it is. You have terrible taste.
That's probably true. That's probably true. Oh, I also saw Sonic. I don't know if you guys have seen Sonic 3.
Yes, I've seen them all.
Did you like it? Oh, yeah. We have to talk about it. We don't have time now, but Sonic 3 was fucking fantastic. I loved that movie so much. It was epic, and it was awesome. I didn't think I was going to like it, but I loved it. I loved it so much. You need to see it, Jaylon. I don't know if you've seen the other Sonic films, but
I literally just put it on my list.
Yeah, the Sonic trilogy.
I was like, before they
really
tell me, let me just.
They're like really good examples of really good fun kids movies. Then they're silly and they're kind of dumb, but they're wonderful and they're really good. You wouldn't think I would say it, but no, I was like watching Sonic 3. I was like,
yeah, so was I. I was like that the other day. I was like, this is so freaking good. I was like, and I was like looking at my dog, and I was just like, don't judge me, don't. I let out a slight squeal at one part, and I was just like, listen. This didn't happen. But yeah, you and the siblings should probably watch it. I think they would like it.
Okay.
If you guys were there. I think just have like a movie night and watch all three of them. And you guys will love them. But anyway, yes, that is our show. I was trying to get out of here before 2 hours, so we're 3 minutes short. But I promise you the next episode will be significantly shorter. I promise. I'm lying. It probably won't be, but it's fine.
Thanks for hanging out with us the full 2 hours if you made it this far.
For anybody that actually does, and I've seen some of this Spotify stats, somebody does listen to this thing in its entirety. So I don't know who they are. I don't mean to Liam Neeson you, but I will find you. No, I'm just kidding. But thank you.
You are hardcore.
Thank you for listening.
Impressed.
I'm impressed too.
Like all the other people, I'm just like, yeah, there's a million podcasts out there. That's fine. But whoever is listening to all of these... That's insane.
You listen to beginning to end. You either have a really long commute or you are just a true fan. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Anyway, we will talk to you guys next week when we talk about the Iron Giant. Oh, technically there's some Superman references there. So yeah, we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening.